hear me?
Hi, Tom. I can hear you. Can you hear?
Perfect. Absolutely. Just wanted to make sure.
I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that the land that upon which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Adirondack, and the Anishinaabe people. We are the beneficiaries of ancient agreements such as the dish with one spoon between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, who agreed to share the abundance of the land through peace, friendship, and mutual respect. The two-row wampum, by which the Haudenosaunee welcomed the settlers and agreed to share the land in mutual respect, and the Treaty of Niagara, considered a fundamental document by First Nations in all future relations and treaties with the British. We recognize that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the land in cooperation and collaboration with the Indigenous peoples, not only for one generation, but for all generations to come. We understand that we have an obligation to learn the lessons of our history, educate ourselves about the experiences of the Indigenous people, and seek opportunities to heal the wounds that will result in reconciliation with our Indigenous sisters and brothers. Many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people live and work in Fort Erie. We stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. We have the good fortune to live in a land of such abundance, diversity, and beauty. Let us be vigilant in protecting Turtle Island. Mr. Clerk, the roll call, please.
Your Worship, all members of Council are present. Councillor Lewis has joined us electronically.
Thank you. There's one addendum. There was a closed session item relative to 613 Helena Street that is being removed. I have one announcement. It's a happy announcement with respect to Connie Byrne, who's a resident of Ridgeway. She recently, on November the 19th, finished her first Ironman triathlon and crossed the finish line a few hours before her birthday. And I'm not going to say which birthday it was, but it's pretty impressive to consider that a triathlon is 2.4 kilometers, which is 1.5 miles, a bike ride of 180.2 kilometers, which is 112 miles, and a run, the equivalent of a marathon, 26.2 miles, or 42.2 kilometers. I've run a marathon several times, never done a triathlon, and I can't imagine the amount of commitment, dedication, time, and food that it would take to get you through one of those things. So congratulations to Connie, and certainly an inspiration for anyone who wishes to participate in these types of activities. So are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? If there are none, then we've got some upcoming public meetings. Our 2024 budget meeting schedule continues with budget meeting number 3 on Wednesday, January the 31st, 2024, at the, with respect to the Fort Erie Public Library, assessment analysis and general levy operating budget. That meeting will start at 6 p.m. The budget bylaws are scheduled for next Monday, December the 18th, 2023, when we'll consider the water and wastewater budget rates bylaw and user fees, and that is also 6 p.m. here in the council chamber. But there's a public meeting with respect to 6 Mile Creek flooding municipal class environmental assessment scheduled for Thursday this week, December the 14th, at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock at the Crystal Ridge Library. And there is a public meeting with respect to the proposed increase in building permit fees. That is scheduled for January the 15th, 2024, here in the council chambers at 6 p.m. The information report with respect to proposed increases in the building permit fees will be on our website on Wednesday, by Wednesday at 5 p.m., January the 10th, 2024. That takes us to public meetings. We have a couple of public meetings this evening. The process for each will be the same. We will receive background information from staff relative to each one. Then we will provide councillors with an opportunity to ask questions with respect to that presentation. Thereafter, we will ask members of the public if they wish to address council with respect to the subject of the public meeting. Thereafter, we'll ask if there's anyone in the digital waiting room who wishes to address council. And finally, we will ask the clerk if there have been any late submissions that are to be considered by council with respect to either of those public meetings. So we'll start with the public meeting relative to the process to review and update the official plan. We're going to hear from Garrett Boerma, the Manager of Policy and Community Planning. Good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I'd just like to present to you our consultants from WSP, Robert and Kamal, who've come to join us this evening to give a presentation on the ongoing official plan review and this kickoff meeting, special meeting of council. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer, and good evening, Your Worship, members of council, town staff, and the public. My name is Rob Rappolt. I am a land use planner with WSP, who have been retained by the town to undertake the review and update of the town's official, official plan. Of course, we're here this evening as a very first opportunity to have dialogue with council, with members of the public, both in person and those who are joining virtually this evening, to talk about the official plan review process and the priorities and considerations that the project team should be making as we move forward through the official plan review process, which I'll spend some time speaking to this evening. So it's certainly the very first and a preliminary opportunity for this important and I think exciting initiative for the town to undertake an update of this very important land use planning document. I'll also note that I'm joined by my colleague, Kamal Kapitanovich, this evening, who is working with me very closely on leading this official plan review process on behalf of the town. In terms of our presentation this evening, we will begin by talking a little bit about the purpose of today's meeting, which I've alluded to briefly in my opening remarks. We'll then spend some time just presenting the overall broader project team to council, talk a little bit about the project background, so why has the town initiated the official plan review updates, and then talk a little bit about the official plan review work program itself, and very importantly, the consultation and engagement program that the project team has identified as important to be undertaken to inform this process over the next several months. And then very briefly towards the end of the presentation, I'll touch on some of the very early work that has been completed to date that has brought us to today's meeting and confirm next steps in the process. And I'm certainly available at the conclusion of the presentation to respond and answer questions to council and members of the public. So first and foremost, we're here as a requirement, a statutory requirement under the Planning Act, which is the provincial legislation that guides land use planning in Ontario as a Section 26 special meeting of council. As I mentioned, this is the very first opportunity that we have to have dialogue and communication with council and members of the public about the official plan review purpose and some of the key priorities and considerations that the project team can take away and ensure that the new official plan is responsive to the local priorities, challenges and opportunities that are unique to the town. We certainly would like to hear about those this evening. I'll note too that no decisions obviously are being made this evening. This is really just that first opportunity to have some of that early dialogue as we work to undertake some of the background work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. I'll also briefly just introduce the project team. I can appreciate this is the first time that you've probably met me and seen me, and I certainly look forward to working with you over the next several months. But I'm supported by a very broad and comprehensive team so that we can ensure that we're responding to the various priorities of the town. And I'll talk a little bit about who some of those subject matter experts are, both with WSP and some sub-consultants that have been retained to support this official plan review. Further to that, the team has identified some very preliminary project and key issues that should be addressed, and this is our starting point. Those items that I'll detail this evening, and again, we'll continue to build and expand upon those as we hear this evening from yourselves, as well as through broader consultation and engagement with the community. And then I'll talk a little bit about the work program and what's been put forward by the project team, including town staff, as a thoughtful and comprehensive work plan that we think is best presented and established to undertake the official plan review, and we're certainly open to your thoughts and feedback in that regard as well. And then lastly, as I've mentioned several times already, just a first opportunity to identify any additional topic areas that the project team should be aware of. As I mentioned, obviously this is an important initiative that the town is undertaking and has started. They've retained WSP to lead this from the consultant perspective. I am the consultant project manager, and my colleague, Mr. Kapsanovich, is the deputy project manager. So it'll be two of us that you'll principally be seeing leading through this project. But we are supported, as I mentioned, by a very broad and comprehensive team at WSP of various subject matter experts, including consultation and engagement, Indigenous community consultation, ecology, transportation, and other infrastructure and asset management, such as water and wastewater, linear infrastructure, among others. Supporting our team are also Parcel Economics, who will contribute to further refinement and analysis of the growth management work that's been undertaken by the region. So that's really the allocation of population and employment growth that the town is forecasted to experience over the next several decades, as well as external lawyers to help ensure that the land use planning framework that we put forward is well understood from a legal perspective. So I'm sure, as you're familiar, an official plan is a very broad and strategic land use planning document that contains a series of goals and objectives and policies that all work together to advance the various land use planning priorities of the province, the region, and critically important, the town itself. It touches on a number of different topic areas or land use planning matters that are known to contribute to complete communities. This includes, for example, housing, employment, agricultural, natural heritage or the environment, as well as economic development, among others, such as infrastructure and growth management planning, for example. The official plan policies are also accompanied by a series of maps or schedules which show where different policies apply, and I'll talk a little bit about these. But for example, they identify how lands are designated and which policies apply to those lands in terms of things like which uses are permitted, what are certain development criteria, and what expectations the town has for those lands in terms of their long-term form and function. And lastly, and very importantly, an official plan is also required to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, as well as conform to a broad range of provincial and regional land use planning plans and their policies. The town's current official plan was first approved in 2011 and identifies 12 key policy areas with a series of goals and objectives to advance those policy areas. As the staff report notes, it's undergone several amendments since 2011, I think about 70, and that's fairly typical for an official plan of that was approved in 2011, so now nearly or a little more than a decade old. Certainly a key opportunity through this exercise is to come forward with a contemporary, streamlined document that is informed and responsive to the town's specific land use planning priorities, opportunities, and challenges, but also takes into account an opportunity to look at these various amendments and updates that we'll intend to streamline and incorporate into the official plan to the extent feasible moving forward. The town's current official plan, of course, addresses or contemplates a broad range of decision-related matters to land use planning, including development itself, roads and transportation, so the infrastructure of how people get around and how lands are serviced with municipal servicing that's required to facilitate that long-term growth. Archaeological resources and built heritage, so including cultural heritage, aggregate and petroleum resources, and also very importantly, the implementation and administrative policies of the official plan. So how is this document actually used and implemented, and what tools are available to the town to implement the policies, including application processing? As I mentioned, the official plan text is accompanied by a series of schedules which illustrate matters such as land uses, certain types of resources, including natural heritage features and hazards and fish habitat, where these cultural heritage and archaeological zones are located, and taking into consideration transportation and infrastructure plans. The purpose of the official plan, as noted on the slide here, includes several key points. First and foremost, it's a statutory requirement of the province through provincial legislation, being the Planning Act, to review a new official plan no less than 10 years after it comes into effect, and every 5 years thereafter. So, of course, as the town's current official plan was first adopted in 2011, it's time to undertake a comprehensive review and update of that plan. It also needs to recognize that there's been changes to the provincial land use planning framework since it was first adopted in 2011. And this includes being responsive to the recently approved regional official plan, which was approved by the province in November of 2022. So these are all changes that set the stage and establish a land use planning framework through which the town's new official plan will be reviewed and updated. The project also represents an important opportunity to review the entire document so that it aligns with the most recent direction, as I've noted. And as we're well aware, there's been many recent changes to the provincial land use planning framework that I know town staff have been working diligently to assess and respond to. And certainly this official plan is a really critical opportunity to do so through the new official plan policy framework. Also, very importantly, is the official plan review represents an opportunity to consider the changing local context and ensure that the evolving needs of the community are met over the next several decades. That could include, for example, a growing population who have needs for housing. There may be needs for additional land to accommodate this growth, both from a housing perspective, but also from an employment perspective. What type of infrastructure is required to accommodate this growth over the long term? We also know that the economy is changing, as well as we're experiencing the impacts of climate change itself. And these are all land use planning matters that will be contemplated, among others, through the forthcoming official plan review. And lastly and importantly, the updated official plan will, of course, establish a new vision for land use planning within the town to the year 2051. So it really is a strategic long-term planning document. The current work program is principally organized into 3 phases. Of course, we're in phase 1 right now, really at the beginning of phase 1. This includes a lot of the background work that the project team has been undertaking to set the foundation and basis for coming forward with the first draft of the official plan, which will occur through phase 2. So phase 1 includes that background research where we're working with our subject matter experts in these various topic areas, assessing the town's current official plan against these changes to the provincial land use planning framework, as well as the region's recently approved official plan review, and undertaking some very preliminary consultation and engagement. And that includes reaching out to Indigenous communities as well as being with you here this evening. The culmination of phase 1 will include a background report, which again will identify the key areas and topic areas through which the official plan, the new and updated official plan, will need to be responsive to. And that will really set the basis for coming forward with the first draft of the official plan in phase 2. As I've mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide, the work plan does contemplate a fairly, in my opinion, robust and comprehensive engagement and consultation program. And certainly that will be our intent once the first draft of the new official plan comes forward, is to bring that out into the community and have conversations with yourselves as well as the broader community stakeholders, as well as Indigenous communities, to talk about the official plan and further refine those policies in response to the input and feedback that we hear. And again, I'll spend a little bit more time talking about the consultation engagement program on the following slide. Phase 3 is effectively the culminating phase of the official plan review process, and that will include revisions and refinements to the draft official plan. Those revisions and refinements will largely be guided and directed through the consultation and engagement that we undertake through phase 2. We will come forward to council with a draft final of the official plan document, move through the statutory processes, so those required public meetings that the Planning Act calls for, which includes obviously a subsequent statutory public meeting with council, and then look to further make our final revisions and refinements to the official plan policy before seeking council adoption. And we anticipate this to occur in about a year or so. As I mentioned, the project team, I think, has put forward a very thoughtful and comprehensive engagement strategy that organizes our consultation program into what we've identified as clusters. So consultation clusters, which is within each 3 phases of the work plan. Phase 1 includes a formal launch of the dedicated project webpage, and the next slide provides some more information on that. Also undertaking initial Indigenous community outreach, and we've had some preliminary responses from the 6 nations of the Grand River, for example. as well as undertaking preliminary agency and ministry meetings, so meeting with those key commenting agencies and ministries such as the Conservation Authority, the region, as well as the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, to ensure that we're taking into consideration their priorities early on in the process as well. Early in the new year, we'll also be looking to undertake a visioning workshop and survey with the broader community. And this will be a further opportunity to identify a broad vision, goals, and objectives for the official plan and the land use planning framework within the town. Phase 2 will largely involve continued updates to the dedicated project webpage, which is an extremely important resource in our opinion for regular project updates and for the community to access important information about the official plan, including draft and final documents. We'll continue to work with our Indigenous community partners as the draft official plan comes together, and we'll also be holding a public open house, which is a broad opportunity for the community to meet directly with the project team and ask questions. The phase 3 will conclude with a third and final consultation cluster, which again will involve updates to the community webpage, continued Indigenous community outreach and consultation with those communities, and then moving through our statutory process, which includes a public open house as well as a statutory public meeting. Just in terms of the dedicated project webpage, what you are able to see on screen here is just a small snapshot of the online webpage that's been created for the project. As I mentioned, in our experience with official plan reviews, and in today's day and age, the online portal is an extremely important and accessible avenue for, or medium, I should say, for the community to access project information, find contact information, for example, to reach out to town staff and the consultants to provide their important input and feedback. They can follow the timeline and the current status of the project itself. They can also contribute and provide their comments directly through various tools within the dedicated project webpage as well. And it's hosted on the Let's Talk Fort Erie webpage, which has been used for other projects, as I understand, and should be well familiar to the broader community. As I mentioned at the outset, we're still very much in the early stages of the project, but we have been undertaking a bit of work to get the project sort of initiated and off the ground. The first sort of online public launch was on October 13th, so just about 2 months ago. Meanwhile, in the background, we've been working to advance the background report, which includes input from those various subject matter experts, as I mentioned, which includes the big moves. So these are the key issues and opportunities that have been identified, and I hope we hear a little bit more tonight on those big moves. We're also undertaking a land use planning conformity review, which includes an analysis of the town's current official plan policies against the region's recently approved official plan and the most recent provincial land use planning framework. And so that provides an opportunity for the project team to understand what changes need to be made to the policy, sort of at a high level, to ensure that we're both consistent with provincial policy and plans, but also conforming to those plans in the region's official plan. We'll also, as I mentioned, in early 2024, be working with the community to host the visioning workshop, which will further refine those guiding principles and goals and objectives for the official plan and the policy framework itself. As I alluded to as well, our sub-consultant team from Parcel will work to further rationalize and assess the population, employment, and house growth forecasts while looking at affordable housing as well as part of that scope of work. Lastly, in terms of reporting back to council, and I can certainly appreciate that this is very much a priority for this type of project, we want to ensure that we're communicating very clearly and regularly what we're hearing from the community and vetting that with the community itself to ensure that we're interpreting and understanding what these priorities are. And one of our tactics that we've identified to do that through is the engagement summary, which will be a formally issued document to the broader community, to the broader public, that explains very clearly what we've heard so far to date and what future opportunities there will be to further provide input and feedback. And I think the way that we will come forward with that document and use the dedicated project webpage as well as other tools is to provide additional opportunity to receive feedback and input on that summary itself. Again, as an opportunity to ensure that we're interpreting and really hearing what the community's priorities are through the official plan review update. So just in terms of immediate next steps, we'll continue to work to finalize the draft background review report, and once we undertake further consultation activities through phase 1, we'll come forward with the engagement summary. We are working to organize currently meetings with our Indigenous community partners to consult with them and hear their initial interest in the project. Of course, we've launched the online engagement through the Let's Talk dedicated project webpage. And we're also working to coordinate and schedule meetings with the region, the Conservation Authority, and relevant ministries, as I've mentioned. And lastly, and something that we're very much looking forward to is hosting the visioning workshop and survey with the community in early 2024. And so with that, I would like to thank you for having the opportunity to be with you here this evening and present on the official plan review. And again, I'm here and available to answer questions as best I can. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And can I just get your last name again?
Sure, it's Rappolt.
Rappel. Okay. Any questions by members of council of Mr. Rappel? So that must have been very articulate and to the point. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Borman, unless you have anything that you wanted to add, then what we will do now is go to the public and see if we've got any public
Thank you.
Comments coming forward. So you may have a seat because none of the councillors have any questions unless Councillor Lewis had any.
Nope, no questions, Your Worship.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to come back up and answer questions at all if needed through the
Okay,
public.
that'd be great.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to address council with respect to the updating of the town's official plan? Do we have anything online, Mr. Patton?
We do have a person online, Your Worship, with a hand up, but do you want me to move them in now?
Please do that. Good evening. And we need your name and address for the record. Yeah, you're on mute right now, Marcy. Please proceed.
Marcy Jacqueline, and I live at 931 Edgemere Road in Fort Erie.
Please proceed.
I applaud the review of the official plan, and I think I understand the reasons for all of it. I also am really excited that the Indigenous community has been mentioned so many times, and I think that's a really big step forward. I was a little surprised that climate change isn't more of an overarching theme for the official plan, given where we live and the impact that climate change is having on our community. So I just wanted to push that forward.
I think that it will be, and it may not have been necessarily addressed directly by Mr. Rappel, but that is the intention.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Any members of council have any questions of Ms. Jacqueline? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the waiting room, Mr. Patton? Okay, and have we received correspondence from any members of the public?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, then I'm going to move to report PDS 79-2023. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Christensen. That report is on the floor for any questions or comments. It's for information purposes. If there are no questions by members of council, Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. In regards to the request by Cherry Hill Golf Club, what would that change that they're requesting result in regards to taxation?
Mr. Borman, do you want to, I don't know if you can answer that or not, but why don't you come up and pass off to Jonathan if you need to.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Noyes, I can't really answer the question about taxation. I can say, though, that we have just received this request just last week from Mr. Kernahan on regards to the golf course, and we've just included it as information, but Our consultants and staff will need to further look at their request to see if it's valid and if it's something that would be addressed through this process. So we're very early stages. Currently, it's designated agricultural in our town official plan and in the region's official plan as well.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you for that explanation. So I understand that it was recent and you still need more information from them. But from some property to go from agricultural to existing open space, is there a huge change, regardless of where it is there a huge change in taxation or a benefit one way or the other?
Through your,
Mr. Bourne indicated he doesn't know the answer.
through your worship, I'd have to defer to.
Mr. Jansen, can you respond to that?
The agricultural tax rate has a much lower ratio than most other tax classes, so depending on how that would be assessed by MPAC, we could make some assumptions on that and get back to you as to what class it might end up in.
Councillor Noyes?
That's fine, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Then I'm going to call the question with respect to the report. All those in favor of receiving the report for information? Did Councillor Lewis put his hand up? It's up. There, I can see him, live and in color. Okay, so that is carried. That takes us to the next public meeting, which relates to development charges. And we're going to follow the same format. And we have a consultant here, I believe, who's going to provide information to us and may be referred to in the report, but I don't have that information in front of me. Good evening.
Good evening.
You've been here before.
I have, yes, 5 years ago.
So I recognize the face, but I gotta tell you, in 5 years, I've forgotten the name.
It's okay. My name's Jacqueline Hall from Hemson Consulting.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Excellent. So good evening, Your Worship, and members of council and staff, and also members of the public. My name's Jacqueline Hall, as I mentioned, and it's a pleasure to be before you today. I am one of the consultants that is leading the town's development charges background study. I was here 5 years ago, and it's great to be back here again. So this evening, the intention of this presentation and the opportunity to have members of the public speak is in order to address one of the requirements of the legislation, which is under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act. Essentially what this requires is that the public is provided with opportunity to make representation on not only the background study, but also the draft development charges bylaw. Both of these documents have been posted on the town's website. The background study was made available on November 22nd, and the draft bylaw was available on November 27th. I will also note that we have had consultation in addition to the meeting this evening with development industry stakeholders. We did hold a meeting with them on November 7th. With respect to the presentation, over the next 15 minutes, what I'd like to present to you is an overview of the background study and the process itself. The legislative changes that have been introduced recently, there's been a lot of action happening at the provincial level and what it means for the town and for this particular update. I'll talk a little bit about the DC study process, including the development forecast, the capital programs, the calculated rates, which have been included not only in the background study, but also in the bylaw itself. I've also included in the presentation this evening a comparison of how the town's new calculated rates compare to other municipalities, not only within Niagara Region, but also some of the surrounding jurisdictions. And then I will conclude with next steps and also, of course, an opportunity for individuals to make comments and ask questions. One of the primary reasons why I'm here this evening is that the town's existing bylaw will expire on March 18th, 2024. The current bylaw includes development charges for a number of services, such as library, fire, parks and recreation, public works fleet. Transit has actually now been uploaded to the region, so that is removed. Administration, which really dealt with growth-related studies. Unfortunately, recent legislative changes have made that no longer eligible. So as part of this update, that is being removed as well. We also have what we call our engineered services, so roads and related, storm, water, and wastewater, which we know are very important services in order to allow growth to continue to occur in the town. The goal of this update is to essentially repeal and replace the existing bylaw, which will include now a new development charge bylaw as well as newly calculated rates. So, what are development charges? They are imposed on development. The idea being is that it is intended to pay for growth-related capital costs. We cannot use this revenue source to pay for other activities such as operational expenditures or asset management provisions. It's strictly related to growth-related capital. It's intended to pay for new infrastructure and facilities to maintain service level. The underlying principle of this funding mechanism is that growth is supposed to pay for growth, so that way the existing taxpayers aren't unnecessarily burdened by new infrastructure that's required of future development. The legislation requires us to impose development charges by bylaw, and in order to do that, we have to prepare a background study, and we have to have at least one public meeting, which is why we're here today. I will also note as well that the development charges are appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I won't go over the schematic in too much detail, but this essentially shows you how we do the study process. The legislation is extremely prescriptive and requires us to undertake a whole host of steps in order to arrive at the rates that I will be presenting to you this evening. We have to undertake a development forecast, which we worked with planning staff in order to develop, and that included the amount, type, and location of development. We established capital programs. We're also limited for many services by a 15-year historic service level, so we do a detailed inventory of your assets, which staff were excellent in helping us complete. We also have to account for several different legislative reductions, so we can't include grants, other contributions, any sort of benefit that the existing community would have, or any shares of projects that would be oversized to service growth occurring beyond our planning horizon. So all of those allocations have to come out of the rates that we calculate. After we do all that analysis, all that work, arrive at what we call our costs that are eligible for recovery, we then split that between two types of development: residential development, which is levied on a per unit basis, and non-residential development, which is levied on either a per square foot or per square meter basis. As I'm sure everyone in the room is maybe painfully aware of, there has been a lot of legislative changes recently happening in the province. In June of 2022, there was an election mandate to build 1.5 million new homes by 2031, and also to increase the affordability of homes across the province. A number of these changes have impacted the way in which we calculate development charges, which we have brought forward as part of the analysis that has been that I'm presenting this evening, and that has been reflected in the background study as well as the bylaw. I will note that a significant amount of changes have also recently been announced with respect to potentially winding back on some of the changes that we've heard. And so we are continuing to monitor that throughout the study process. Everything that is before council and the public tonight does reflect the legislation as it currently stands. However, if there are any changes that are made, one, the legislation will supersede anything that we currently have in the study or in the draft bylaw. And two, if any of those changes come out before the new bylaw is passed, we will be sure to incorporate that into our analysis. So just to get into what some of these changes include, Bill 23, which was the More Homes Built Faster Act, is one of the most significant bills that impacted the development charges and how we calculate them in Ontario. So there was new statutory discounts and exemptions that were introduced. Rates now have to be statutorily phased in over a 5-year period, and I'll show everyone what that means in a couple of slides. There's also exemptions for nonprofits, affordable and attainable housing housing, although I will note that the affordable and attainable housing has not yet been enforced. The province is still working on how exactly those units are going to be defined and what the thresholds will be. There's also discounts for rental housing, which is based on the number of units and the number of bedrooms. There's also been some methodological changes to how we do development charges. We're now required to look at a 15-year historic service level as opposed to 10. Housing and study, DC eligible costs or DC costs related to housing, affordable housing and studies are no longer eligible. So those have also come out of our rate calculations. There's been some administrative changes as well. Municipalities can charge interest on DCs that are frozen or determined at a certain point of time and then paid later on. And so those can now, those interest rates are now frozen at prime plus 1% or restricted to prime plus 1%. DC bylaws used to expire every 5 years, which is why I'm here 5 years later after we did the last update. That has now been extended to 10. So that's good news for some municipalities, but obviously anything that we do has the impact to last for 10 years unless we do a repeal or update of the bylaw sooner. Also, council, as part of the, or staff rather, as part of the treasurer statement, we have to commit or spend or allocate 60% of the reserve fund balances in each year for water, wastewater, and road services. It's a fairly easy exercise to do, recognizing that these projects are quite costly. And I will just reiterate that is spend or allocate. So simply earmarking funding is absolutely reasonable to meet that requirement. I appreciate that there are a lot of numbers on the slide, but I'm going to just highlight a couple of key numbers that are quite relevant to the development charges rates that I'll be showing in a couple of slides. What you see here is a summary of our capital programs by eligible service. So you can see at the top we have our general services, which include library, fire, parks and recs, as well as public works. Those services are done on a 10-year planning horizon of 2023 to 2032. And the total costs that are attributed to Fort Erie amount to $50 million for those services. What we end up actually including in the development charge rates after we make adjustments for shares of projects that are going to benefit existing residents, shares of projects that will benefit residents or growth occurring beyond 2032, as well as any sort of available reserve funds. Of that $50 million, we're actually proposing to only fund about $19.4 million through the development charges rates. There's a similar story on the engineered services. Now this number is much larger for a few different reasons. One, we are looking at a longer planning horizon, so 2023 to 2041. As well, engineering infrastructure does tend to be more costly. We all know how much water and wastewater infrastructure can cost, so that's reflected in the amounts you see here. So the totality of the engineered services amounts to $320 million. 73 million of that is considered to be ineligible and needs to be funded from other revenue sources. There's 10 million available in DC reserves, and about 96 million of that will be recovered from growth happening beyond 2041. And so that is DC eligible. It'll be picked up in subsequent studies, but it is not being included in the calculation right now. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see that of the 370 million capital program, about 43% or 160 million of that is being brought into the development charges rates. The DCs that I will be presenting this evening are the maximum permissible DCs under the legislation. In terms of our residential rate structure, we're not proposing to change anything from the current bylaws, so the residential rates will be levied on a per unit basis for singles, semis, multiples, which are essentially your row houses, apartments that have 2 more bedrooms, or apartments with 1 bedroom or less, and then the non-residential component, which would apply to commercial, industrial, institutional uses, that has been calculated on a uniform basis based on per square meter of gross floor area. What you see on the slide here is the calculated residential development charges. These are the fully calculated rate. So a single and semi-detached unit in the town, once the full rates are implemented, would be $36,890. An apartment with 1 bedroom or less would pay $15,919 a unit. The reason for the differences is that this reflects the various occupancies within those types of units. And so a single and semi typically has a higher occupancy than an apartment, so that's why they pay more. What you can see here on the pie chart is what makes up the rate and how it's divided between those services. So not unlike what we see in the overwhelming majority of municipalities in Ontario is that engineered services, roads, water, wastewater makes up the bulk of the rate, with parks and recreation, fleet, fire protection, library being the smaller of those charges. On the non-residential side, the fully calculated rate amounts to $146, excuse me, and 91 cents a square meter. Similarly, again, we see that the engineered services comprise the majority of that rate. I will note, for non-residential services, we do not levy a charge for library and parks and rec services, recognizing that those are largely driven by residential growth. So the slide before you provides a comparison of the current rates in the town and what you would pay over the next 5 years, recognizing that the legislation now requires the fully calculated rates be phased in over a 5-year period. So in year 1, we can only charge 80% of the fully calculated rate. In year 2, it goes up to 85%, and so on and so forth in 5% increments until we get to 100% in year 5. So if an individual were to come to the counter today, building a single detached home, they would pay a rate of $21,878 a unit. Once the bylaw is in force, in year 1, that rate would jump to $29,512 a unit, so about a 35% increase. On the non-residential side, recognizing that the town does exempt industrial development, so in this example, if a commercial use was coming in, they would currently pay $85 a square meter, and once the bylaws introduced, they would pay $117 a square meter, or a 38% increase. And then over the subsequent 4 years, the remaining of the calculated rate would be phased in. A couple of reasons why the rates are increasing is that there have been updates to the capital projects themselves, as well as significant cost escalations, which we've seen happen essentially across the province. We've updated the development forecast to reflect some of the new timing and some of the development activity that's been happening, especially recognizing that we have new information from the region's MCR work. As well, we've identified new projects associated with growth areas and urban areas in the municipality as well, so those have also brought into our analysis. I will also note that DC's development charges can be frozen at site plan or rezoning application as well. So individuals who are coming in with site plans now, they would be frozen at the current rate, and then when they pull their permit, they would pay that rate subject to the interest policies. So the next part of the presentation, I wanted to show the rate comparison. I will caution a few things because everybody asks for these comparisons. They are helpful. However, it is very challenging to do a pure apples to apples comparison between jurisdictions for a whole host of reasons. Municipalities, not only within Niagara Region, but also surrounding regions as well. They have different services, different growth pressures, different geographies. All of these contribute to how their development charges essentially shake out. And there's also some municipalities in this chart as well that are going through DC reviews or will be undertaking DC reviews in the short term. Niagara Falls is one example. They're anticipated to bring forward a new bylaw in the spring, summer of 2024. So what you can see here is that we've included the town's current urban rates. You can see the green arrow shows that it's identified at $47,619. That's layering in also the region's development charges as well as the education development charges as well. Once the new bylaw is passed, that would move you up in the pack slightly above the Pelham municipality there, and so you would see that the rate now increases to the $53,800 a unit. By year 5, it would then increase to the $61,200 a unit or $180 a unit, recognizing as well that by the time you get to year 5, many of these municipalities will have undertaken development charge updates. Things would have changed, things will move around, but we wanted to give you a snapshot of what this would look like today. We've also done a similar comparison on the non-residential side. This is just for retail, recognizing that the town does exempt industrial development currently in the bylaw. And so you could see here that Fort Erie, the current rate, which is shown with the green arrow, is really in the middle of the pack. Once the new bylaw is introduced, year 1 calculated rate, still relatively within that same area. And then, of course, once the year 5 rate is fully implemented, that would move you up higher, but recognizing once again that these will change as other municipalities also update their rates as well. With respect to the DC policies that have been included in the draft development charge bylaw, which is available on the town's website, there are statutory exemptions that we have included, which come straight from the legislation. So municipal and regional buildings, they're exempt. Boards as defined under the Education Act, intensification within existing residential units, so whether or not you have a new residential unit, you're adding a secondary suite, an in-law suite, a granny flat, those are statutorily exempt. Or if you have an existing dwelling unit and you're adding additional units as well, there's also exemptions and parameters and rules around that. Industrial uses do receive an exemption if the existing space is expanded up to 50% of what is there currently. And then there's some other provisions arising from Bill 23, which I covered earlier on in the presentation, which included the nonprofit exemption, the rental housing discounts, as well as the potential exemption for attainable and affordable housing, which is not yet in force. Non-statutory exemptions are exemptions that the town can choose to introduce. There's no requirement. The proposed non-statutory exemptions are largely based off of what the town currently has and are very common, the list that I have before you on the slide, with what we see in other municipalities. So exemptions for cemeteries, burial grounds, places of worship, agricultural uses, as well as associated commercial space up to 500 square feet, private schools, hospitals, development in core areas, the Brownfield Development Charge Exemption Program, as well as municipal housing project facilities. All of those are provided with exemptions. One of the changes that we have introduced as part of the draft bylaw is consideration for removing the industrial exemption. Currently, those uses are exempt under the town's existing 2019 DC bylaw. The council has options to consider when implementing the rates, of course. You can continue to provide exemptions. The rates can be phased in further than what the legislation requires. There's also opportunity to provide grants outside of the DC bylaw as well through CIP policies. So there are considerations that certainly can be made. When non-statutory exemptions are provided, however, foregone DC revenues do have to be made up through other revenue sources. So typically that falls into the property tax base or your utility rates. And I promise I am on my last slide. I'm just wrapping up with next steps. We have come a long way. We've been working with staff quite diligently over several months in order to arrive at the background study. Staff have done an excellent job of providing input to the calculations and working with us to get to where we are today. Obviously, we're here in December at the statutory public meeting. The idea is that the bylaw would come before council for passage at the end of January, recognizing though that we do have until March 18th in order to pass a new bylaw, so potentially some room there if we needed to bump that date out a little bit. And I will open it up to questions. Thank you very much.
For that presentation. Members of council, Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you very much for the presentation this evening. I just had one question, and I had raised it with staff and some of my colleagues earlier, but it's with regard to the difference between single-family home and multi-residential. We've been seeing a lot of multi-residential homes being built, townhouses here in Fort Erie, and it's kind of a concern that we're starting to see it affect our housing mix. And one of the issues that I broached was a parity between single-family, semi-detached, and multi-residential units. And it's my understanding that there may be some provincial policies that may have an impact on that. Are you able to share some of that information just on how we come to that determination relative to the residential uses?
Yes, absolutely. So through your worship, maybe I could just seek clarification on the question. Is the question about how we arrive at the distinction between the unit types and those breakpoints and how we determine those?
Yeah, and the pricing difference, because
yes.
it's a lower rate for even though, and I mean, let's be honest here, we're seeing 2,000, 2,200 square foot townhomes go in, the same as any other single-family home. So I'm wondering how that distinction is essentially defended, if you will.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So through your worship, it's a great question. We do get asked this quite a bit because it seems a bit strange, right? When you have a townhouse that is the same size as a single detached and they pay the same. And it really comes down to how we undertake the calculation and the data that we rely upon. So we look to Stats Canada to give us information on the occupancies of the different unit types. And the residential rate is then effectively factored up by those occupancies for the various unit types. And so a single and semi-detached, believe it or not, on average, even if the size is the same as a townhouse, tend to have more residents live in them than a townhouse dwelling unit of the same size. Now, it's never perfect because there's obviously size threshold differences that can happen. Now, and I think you alluded to this in your question, the province has introduced the ability to have additional suites and apartment units within homes, and that can, of course, affect the PPU. But then the way that gets brought into our calculation is those units are actually redefined and treated differently. And same with how the bylaw would apply to them as well. So once you have a unit in a basement of a single detached, it's an additional dwelling unit and it's actually exempt from the development charges, but the primary unit typically still has the same type of occupancy that another single would. So it's not a perfect science, but it is the accepted approach. It's been tried and tested before the tribunal. We also, unfortunately, don't do residential forecasts based on space. We do them based on unit types. So that's why we have the differences between them. And it's another reason why we do our updates as well, to try to look at the definitions and say, are these still working? Are these still appropriate? And we've done a very extensive review of the bylaw this time to make sure that they do reflect what we're seeing here in Fort Erie as the built form.
You may.
And thank you for that explanation. That's actually quite enlightening, the information you provided, and I appreciate it. The only follow-up I have to that, with respect to the occupancy data, is this something that we look at nationwide for averages across the entire country, or is it something we drill down to a local level? Because I imagine perhaps in larger communities or much larger houses are being built, you may have many more people, perhaps multi-generational, living in those homes in a way that we don't see here. So I'm just wondering how we break that down and how we make it work in a community like Fort Erie that has different occupancy and different housing types than what you would have perhaps in the GTA or Vancouver or somewhere like that.
Yes, through your worship. Another great question. The information I use is actually specific to Fort Erie, and you're absolutely correct. The occupancies here in Fort Erie are quite different than even your neighbors in Niagara Falls. And so when we do the studies, we are specific to your geography. Yeah.
Any other councillor? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Going on the same vein as Councillor Dubanow, because, some of the questions I was going to ask. In regards to occupancy, where was that data collected? Like, is that the last 2 years, the last 20 years? Like, how current is that data that you're using?
Yeah, through your worship. So, excellent question. It's based on the Statistics Canada data for the census period, so that would be 2021. So it is quite relevant. And so the last background study we did, it was based on the 2016 data. So actually, you can see that the occupancy data we've used has actually shifted and updated to reflect the latest information from StatsCan.
Okay, thank you. In regards to trying to figure if I have in regards to the DC rate as it increases, you have 80%, I think it was 38%, 6%, 6%, 6%, whatever, 38% increase overall. We do have the option of not doing it. We could do 25, 25, 25, 25 if we wanted to, right?
Through your worship, excellent question. So the phase-in schedule that we have put before you is required by the legislation. The town can choose to offer deeper phase-in. So for example, you could phase in the rates over 10 years instead of 5, but at minimum, we have to hit the 80% of the calculated rate in year 1, 85% of the calculated rate in year 2, as it's been set out and prescribed that way through the Development Charges Act.
Okay, so we don't really have much choice on that. In regards to, on slide 7, if you could go back to that, I just need a definition on.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
Okay, when it says the second new methodological changes, housing and studies are no longer eligible for services, what, can you define that further or give me some examples of what they would have been?
Yes, through your worship. Great question. So prior to Bill 23 receiving royal assent, municipalities did have the option to include affordable housing as a DC eligible service in their bylaws. So we saw projects that would have included affordable housing projects completed by the municipality itself. There were some other programs as well in terms of affordable home ownership that I had seen in other municipalities. So that's the example for that particular service. For studies, we used to be able to recover the cost of actually the development charges background study itself in the rates. We also included things like library master plans, parks master plans, transportation master plans. Unfortunately, all of those have now had to come out of the rate calculations as they're now ineligible for recovery.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Any other members of council? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, and thank you for the presentation. In the exemptions, you indicated that an accessory unit within the building. Is that also a detached accessory unit? So if someone's going to place a new unit on an existing property, that is ineligible?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. Another great question. Yes, so the legislation does provide very strict parameters around how those exemptions work for not only units being built within the existing dwelling, but also accessory to that as well. So depending on the type of unit, there's a certain number that you're permitted to have before a rate would be triggered. So yes, it does include accessory dwellings.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Any other members of council? I don't know if Councillor Lewis has any questions. Is his hand up? No? So Ms. Law, I thought I heard you say that before Bill 23, there were some municipalities that were providing development charge relief for affordable housing units, and the government no longer permits that. Did you say that?
So prior to Bill 23, Your Worship, what municipalities were able to do was actually include a service in their DC rate calculation for affordable housing. So say the town had affordable housing capital infrastructure projects, we could then levy a DC rate and use development charges to fund those. Interestingly, the province removed that, and then they've now said that they would like to exempt affordable and attainable housing developments from development charges, but we don't have those definitions yet.
Right, and Bill 23, just refresh my memory, Bill 23 was passed when?
That was passed on November 28th, 2022, so over a year ago now.
A year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And my recollection is that sometime between then and now, and I think it's referred to in the report that's coming up, the province had indicated that they would be making municipalities whole if they lost any money on the development charges changes that they made. Any word on that?
Yes, Your Worship, that's a great question. Unfortunately, no. We simply heard the statement that municipalities will be kept whole. However, there was some perhaps indication that it might be tied to achieving the housing targets that were assigned to municipalities, although it was never really confirmed. So unfortunately, we don't have more details. There has been the recent announcements of the winding back of the official plan decisions by the ministry. We have heard some suggestion that potentially some of the development charge changes, including the phase-in, might now be something that's being reviewed and potentially also wound back, although it's just essentially a rumor at this point. We don't have anything confirmed.
Slide 7 that Councillor Noyes referred you to also made reference to the 60% expenditure of development charges in reserves each year. That does seem to be, in my view, unrealistic insofar as many of these growth-related projects are dependent upon build-outs. Any comments on that?
Yes, Your Worship. Also a great question. So the key language in the legislation is spend or allocate. And so what we see a lot of municipalities doing is earmarking 60% of those reserves against those larger projects that won't be funded for quite some time. So our engineered planning horizon in the background study is to 2041. We know the Arcadia pumping station, for example, that's quite a significant project on the horizon. That could be something that some of those funds could be earmarked for over time, and as well as other projects as well. So it's not just one project you attribute the 60% to, it's a number of projects.
So the money would, if I can conceive this, the money then would be allocated to that specific envelope for that specific project, and can it be at some point in the future taken out and allocated to something else if there's a more immediate need?
Yes, Your Worship. Our understanding is that through the annual treasurer's statement, that 60% allocation can be revised and revisited annually, especially as the municipality goes through its annual capital budgeting process. We fully expect there to be changes in terms of project cost and scope, and so absolutely, that could be addressed at that time.
You indicated that in your presentation that there can now be 10 years between review of development charges. And the amounts that are established, even over a 5-year period, particularly during turbulent economic times, can be eroded quite quickly. Is there any mechanism in the legislation that provides for escalation of the charges over that 10-year period?
Yes, also a great question. So the legislation does allow us to index the development charge rates, which we do in accordance with the non-residential construction price index. That is done on an annual basis, and those rules are set out actually in the town's bylaw. But that's essentially the only mechanism that we're able to use in order to address any sort of cost escalations. The other way that, of course, you can do it is to amend your bylaw before the 10-year period. Typically, we don't see that happen, though, unless there are substantial project costs that have been brought forward. So, for example, if the town undertakes a new master plan, transportation, or water wastewater master plan, it might warrant a review to say, to determine whether or not an update would be reasonable within the 10-year time frame.
So as an example, I'm sure you're familiar with this, over the past couple of years, there's been an unbelievable escalation in the cost of construction for many of our projects, and most of the projects which had been budgeted a year, 2 years ago, we've had to supplement because the actual tenders, when they come in, are much higher than what was budgeted. Based on the construction index, which could be 13% year over year, is that the type of modification we can make to the development charges?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Just to kind of go back to where Councillor Dubanow was, so what is the definition of a multiple residential unit?
Yes, Your Worship. I apologize, I don't have the bylaw in front of me, but the definition is intended to capture townhouse dwelling units as well as back-to-back townhouses as well.
So is there, the recommendations that you have put forward and that we have in our report follow some type of format, which you've explained in the study. Is there anything to say that we have to keep the multiple charges a certain relationship to the singles and semis? Or could we theoretically charge more for multiples than we do for singles and semis?
Yes, Your Worship. So the way in which that we determine the rates for the various unit types is based on the occupancy data that we get from Stats Canada specific for the town of Fort Erie. That data supports that the multiple dwellings, the townhouses, do have a lower occupancy on average than the single and semi-detached dwellings on average. So to do something to structure a rate that would be different than that would be quite challenging, as it doesn't support the way in which the legislation requires us to undertake the calculation.
So we're going to be stuck in the data from 2021, and it could be that over the past several years and going into the future, with larger townhomes and only townhomes being built, that there's a realistic possibility that more families will be occupying townhomes, isn't there?
Yes, that's a great comment. And we do, I will note, we do review the StatsCan data and check it against the development patterns that we are anticipating for the municipality over the planning horizon. So if we feel, for example, that the town's percentage of apartments, for example, or percentage of multiples is increasing relative to, say, the singles and semi-detached, and therefore we are expecting more residents of family-forming ages to reside in smaller dwellings, that the occupancies are reflective of that. We do indeed review that information to make sure that it's reasonable. The data that we see before us, though, even in municipalities that we have seen those patterns happen for quite some time, so the city of Mississauga is a good example, the city of Toronto as well, we do still continue to see the ground-related single and semi-detached units tend to have higher occupancies even still than, say, the apartments or the multiples. They do increase over time, certainly, and the gaps between them do narrow, but that does take quite a bit of time for it to happen. And so with the apartment data, we did look at those occupancies, and we did make some adjustments to those, certainly, but we did feel that the multiples were reasonable based on what we were thinking over the forecast period.
So what if we had a desire through policy to create a different housing mix and maybe try to promote smaller singles, whether it's a 4,000 square foot home or a 900 or 800 square foot tiny home, it's the same development charge, is it not?
Yes, great question. It would be if it met the definition of a single detached dwelling under the bylaw. So yes, if it was a tiny house, it had servicing, it was detached from everything else, you're correct. It would pay the same rate as a single detached dwelling in a subdivision with, that's 3,000 square feet, for example. The occupancy data is averages, so it never will be perfect. Unfortunately, there isn't a perfect way to do that for that analysis. However, that being said, council can absolutely has jurisdiction to make policy decisions around whether or not it's reasonable to charge, say, a tiny house at 50% less than the single rate, for example, or create a new rate category for that particular type of dwelling. If there's certain units that council or staff would like us to look at, we can certainly take that back and provide some options.
So as an example, if we were interested in 1,100, 1,200 square foot houses being built, we could carve out some type of different rate for houses of that size.
So, Your Worship, yes, we could certainly look at that. There may be revenue implications to it in terms of if we have to scale back the rate comparative on average to other single and semi-detached dwelling units, but we can certainly look at that and see whether or not there would be a way for us to make it revenue neutral.
So as an example, could we provide a special rate for houses under 1,200 square feet or even 1,500 square feet? Different rate, but for multiples that exceed 1,500 square feet, charge a higher rate.
So, Your Worship, yes, it's an excellent question. We can certainly look at that. The town of Blue Mountains did for some time do something very similar to what you are suggesting. And actually, they ended up moving away from it because what they found was happening is that the developers were building units right up until certain thresholds, and then they wouldn't build anything over and above that. And it actually complicated the unit mix. I was not involved with the study when that rate structure was developed, but we can certainly look into it and provide you with the outcomes and why it was changed. Because I know they did end up reverting back to the residential unit categories that are very similar to what we're proposing for the town. So we'd be happy to pull that example and provide some more details on it, certainly.
That would be very helpful. Don't want to monopolize your time here. I think you've covered the questions that I wanted to ask of you. Thank you very much for your time. Any other members of council? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Actually, it's based on occupancy also, and the stats. You were saying they used the census, right, from 2021?
Yes, through your worship, that is correct.
Okay. So with the aging in place, like I take myself for example, 15 years ago, no, actually more than that, 20 years ago, we had like 5 people living in our house. Now we have 2 people living in our house. Does the census take that in consideration? With all the aging in place, and I know so many people my age that, you know, the kids have moved out, the grandchildren haven't moved in, and, you know, they're living in a single house with only 2 people. Does the census take that into consideration?
Yes, Your Worship. So excellent question. We're definitely getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm happy to go there. We actually use occupancy data from units that are only 10 years old or less. The reason being is that individuals of family forming ages tend to buy newer units, and so the occupancies of the units, exactly as you pointed out, are the highest in the first 10 years of the dwelling, and then as you age in place, you know, the kids move out, sometimes people end up becoming widows, unfortunately, and so you see the occupancies come down. But that peak period happens in the 10 years, and that's what we base the development charge rates off of.
Okay, thank you. That now makes more sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Patton, if Councillor Lewis doesn't have his hand up, then we're going to move on. Thank you very much, Ms. Law, for your presentation and the information that you provided to us. We're now going to go to the public in case there's anyone here that wishes to address council. If so, please come forward, provide your name and address, and we will hear your comments. If that was a wave, sir, please come forward.
I have a presentation, but I'm not sure if I go now or...
You have a presentation.
Yes, a couple of slides in regards to the development charges.
Yeah, you're an individual and you want to address council with respect to the development charges.
Yes.
This is your opportunity. And our staff has your presentation?
Yes,
Yep.
they do.
And your name and address, please.
Sean Rapone, and I'm representing CMI Heavy Industries. We're on 2677 Winger Road in Stevensville. And I'm also the vice chair of the Niagara Industrial Association, and I'm representing them in this matter as well.
Okay.
So CMI Heavy Industries is a manufacturing company in Stevensville, and just going to speak about, in particular, the reason to continue to exempt the industrial development charges. I'm going to speak about the proposed industrial charges, the Hempson study, Town of Fort Erie customers, Economic Policy Institute study on the multiplier effect of industrial establishments. Now, proposed DC, in speaking with staff, a fully implemented industrial development charge at $13 per square foot. A 100,000 square foot building would be paying about $1.3 million in development charges. The relevant analysis that the Hempson study did, they didn't take into consideration the domino effect of an industrial company coming into a town. They did take into account the town's capital budget, the existing master plans, and discussion with staff. But it fails to analyze the customers and prospective customers of the town of Fort Erie. Now, who are the customers? There's residential, commercial, existing industrial developments, and prospective industrial developments. How are these customers different? Well, developers for residential, they're looking for low cost, high selling price, looking for good, residents are looking for high paying employment. And Fort Erie competes with local municipalities, other local municipalities, Niagara Falls, Welland, Port Colborne, for the competition. Same with retail. Retail are driven by disposable income from residents, and they sell their goods and services to the residents. And again, Fort Erie competes with other local municipalities to get them here. Now, industrial is a little bit different. Industrial looks for, companies look for the most effective or cost-effective area to build their facilities and put their footprint down. Industrial companies usually sell their products globally, and it really doesn't matter which municipality they're in. So Fort Erie competes not only with the local municipalities, but also with the North America and sometimes globally. Now, why do we want industrial development in Fort Erie? Well, high-skilled careers, high-paying jobs, creates wealth for the community, and direct economic impact to the community, and also indirect. Now, why do we want them here? Well, not all jobs are considered equal. Now, if there's a job created in manufacturing or industrial, the multiplier effect is 7.4 new jobs in other industries that support manufacturing. Where if you have retail, it's only 1.2 jobs per each job created. Construction is 2.3, but industrial, every job created creates 7.4 new jobs. Some studies, and this is from the Economic Policy Institute, some studies even show that number being as high as 9, a multiplier of 9. So if we have an industrial company that moves into Fort Erie with 100 new jobs, that will create 740 indirect jobs from that. In total, it would be 840 new jobs created in Fort Erie from 100 industrial job company coming in, putting their footprint in Fort Erie. With an average of 2.5 people per household, that equals 334 new homes into Fort Erie. With those 334 new homes, $12 million in development charges would be attained by the city. And additionally, approximately $1.7 million in perpetuity in annual property taxes. Now, if that was only 10% of the jobs end up living in Fort Erie, you're still at a break even, which most of the time people live close to their employment. And in summary, industrial development is the best investment that Fort Erie can make. With the 7.4 jobs to 1 growth ratio, high-paying jobs, increased residents' wealth, increases the town's revenues and wealth, increases disposable income to support residential and commercial developments, and it really helps the community as a whole. So my suggestion to council is to continue to exempt the industrial developments from the development charges. It also goes into the same, I guess, the Niagara Regional Plan has the same, I guess, outlook on it, and they've exempted it as well. So I ask council to do the same.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapone. Don't go away. You're aware of the fact that the municipality doesn't get to keep all of the tax revenue from a new home?
No, they do not get to keep it all, but you want those jobs in Fort Erie.
Right. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Dubanow and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I'm actually glad you came here to speak about it because they're similar concerns I have. I just, 2 questions that you might be able to shed some light on just for information for people listening. Being in the position you are within the Industrial Association, are you able to give context to other municipalities in Niagara, whether they have development? I know you had mentioned the region, but Welland or Niagara Falls or Port Colborne, for example, do you have any information on whether they're moving in this direction with development charges, or do they currently exempt them? Are they planning to continue exempting them? What have you just heard on the ground in your role?
So there is a mix from what I've heard. Some that don't want as much industrial development. I believe some of them are contemplating having some, not having the exemption anymore. Some do still have it. And really, I don't think that's a good measure just to look at the local municipalities, because like I stated, industrial companies, has anyone here ever bought a product from CMI, Airbus, Abatement Technologies, Fleet? All those products, money comes in, they're sold, the products are sold elsewhere, so we're competing with Texas, Buffalo, New York, every state in North America, and really it drives money into the community and spent by the wages and other auxiliary companies helping those companies produce their products. So it's very important not to just look locally.
No, and if I may, Your Worship, I appreciate that, because just going back to one factory that we had go up recently, or at least is in the process of going up, that was competing with Eastern Ontario. It was definitely not just an Niagara thing, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Mm-hmm. But just to go on another topic, with regard to the tax levy and the rates that industry pays, my understanding is that a dollar for dollar value of the property, industrial and manufacturing type businesses pay a considerably higher amount of property taxes than an equivalent value residential would. Can you just give us an example, just so we understand how the levy implications for this type of development in a community, what it's, the positive effect, if you will?
The positive effects on the property taxes?
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely. From my knowledge, an industrial building that has an impact value of $2 million would pay in excess of $100,000, $110,000 in property tax.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Noyes.
Well, thank you. Actually, Councillor Dubanow asked the same questions I was going to ask, so I had the answers. Thank you.
Well done, Councillor Dubanow. Is Councillor Lewis got his hand up, or is he good for now?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Rapone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've seen that data before at the region. So
yes.
I'm familiar with it.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to address council? Anybody in the waiting room, Mr. Patton?
There is, Your Worship, but there's no hand.
Okay, so if that person wishes to address council, I would suggest he or she raise their hand. No action. We'll go to the clerk for the moment. Mr. Clerk, have we received some correspondence? I think we received a couple of items, did we not?
Correct, Your Worship. Staff received written comments from the following. It was a joint submission from Greater Fort Erie Chamber of Commerce and Niagara Industrial Association, and an additional piece of correspondence from Ben Koo, 2350048 Ontario Limited.
Okay, and they will be part of the record.
That's correct.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Patton. Anyone in the room that evidences any indication they wish to address council? No. Okay. Then I'm going to close this public meeting, and we're going to go to report CS 13 2023, which is the 2023 Development Charges Background Study and Recommendations. Do I have a mover? Councillor Dubanow. Did you want to speak to this?
I do, but...
Councillor McDermott.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I'd just like to pose a question to Mr. McQueen with regards to the industrial DC exemption. You know, we've had this for some time now, and I know it's a selling point when you're trying to sell Fort Erie to people who want to be here. Maybe you can tell me why that's not recommended in this report.
Mr. McQueen.
Through the chair to Councillor McDermott, it's a great question. The DC bylaw is a fairly significant policy issue, and it has a 10-year planning horizon and multi-million-dollar implications. And so we believe that this was a council-level policy decision. So the report was put forward with recommendations from Hempson. Hempson has recommended that if council entertains any exemptions, that they put in place a corresponding grant program for the purposes of keeping the DC funding whole, because those projects will require that funding in some future year. So we have, in anticipation of that question, we did include an alternative in the report that if an industrial development charge exemption was put in place, that council would have the option to put that amendment on the floor, and we'd certainly carry that forward. But we did believe that this was a significant policy issue that was better suited at the council level as opposed to a staff level recommendation for any of the exemptions.
Councillor McDermott?
Thank you for that.
Anyone else? Councillor Dubanow, and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And yeah, anytime the issue of development charges comes up, it's always a thought-provoking process because it's a multi-year financial endeavor that can also have impacts on how a community grows and the way we do things moving forward. So it's something I personally look at very closely and try to find a way to make it align with what residents have told me. Now 2 terms on council, you run into elections, you hear a lot of things. I am not inclined to charge development charges on industrial, and the reason being, when you look at the spin-off effects, I mean, that information from the Industrial Association, I've seen it from multiple sources. Residential and commercial tend to go hand in hand. Residential is built where there's demand. Commercial then comes when the residential follows, but you're in an entirely different ballgame when you're talking industry. That's what provides the long-term sustainable jobs in a community that then allows those individuals to go out, shop in the stores, buy homes, grow a family. One of the things I mentioned when I ran in 2018, and anyone in Ward 2 who knows when I knocked on their door, I said that I wanted to see a community that actually provided economic prosperity and opportunity for my children so that when they grow up, they don't move away, and that if I'm living here in Fort Erie, I can see my grandkids grow up, because I know so many individuals have, their kids have moved away to brighter prospects, and then they see their grandkids 3 times a year, and it really bothered me. Anything that we can do to encourage that kind of investment in our community, I understand there's a cost. I don't view it as a cost, I view it as an investment into our future. So I'll let other councillors speak, but I'd be prepared to move that amendment. With regard to the questions, Your Worship, that you raised earlier with regard to finding ways to carve out the development charges on the residential side to better reflect the housing mix that we're trying to see in the community, I agree with where you're going on that, and that's why I was concerned when I saw a lower rate for multi-residential, because now we're seeing subdivisions of 150 townhomes. And I understand that there's a reality to land use costs, but there's also a taxation benefit as well when looking at development charges and other things. And I think within the local level, if we want to see more single-family homes, there's things that we can do to encourage that kind of development, and the development charges bylaw may be one of those vehicles that we can use. So I'd like to move that amendment, but at the same time, if we need more information from the consultants, it may be worthwhile to postpone this perhaps a month just so that we can get some more information, have a broader discussion, because something as important as this, which lasts for 10 years, we got to get it right. And I don't think anyone at this horseshoe here, well, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'm willing to put this off for a month if it means getting it right and getting some more information. So that's where I feel on this, Your Worship, but I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say. There might be some good insight.
So you've got 2 possible motions. One is an amendment with respect to the industrial development charges. I'd like you to put that on the floor now. Councillor Noyes, you can speak to that amendment, or I'll come back to you after we deal with the amendment. But you're going to get a chance to speak either way.
I would like to put that on the floor right now, Your Worship, if you think that's appropriate.
I do think it's appropriate. So the amendment would be to grant an exemption to, or Mr. Jansen, what would you say would be the best wording if we want to continue the program that we have right now where we do provide exemptions for industrial development charges?
Yeah, we included two alternatives in the report. One was for a full exemption, which was the model that was previously approved. Alternative two was to create an industrial use grant program. My preference would be that we would come back to this and look at those together and the different flexibility and benefits of those. With the grant, that is following and aligning with the model of what the region implemented a year or two ago with their DC study. That does give the municipality a lot more flexibility within a 5 or 10 year horizon to adjust the program, particularly when we're really mindful, as the CAO pointed out, of the financial implications over the longer term of that type of program. The exemptions must be funded, as was noted, and so there's real budget impacts for the levy, for the town, and for the rates, and that's something that would we would really need to begin budgeting as well. It's something we've managed. We've certainly seen large growth within the last DC study, but as we're approaching the level of impact that we've seen in recent years, it's something we also need to put in place as part of our base budget. There's options within a grant program like that where you could be capping amounts year to year. There's different alternatives with the way we can fund that over multiple years. So the preference would be to bring that back as an option, I believe, at this point.
Okay, so just for clarity, the development charges bylaw would include a rate for industrial, but there would be a corresponding grant program that would provide relief.
That's correct. It's something that could align as well with other programs we have. We do incent development for industrial with the tax increment-based grant program, which has criteria that we could look at. So we believe there's some ways we could gauge the level of investment being made on both sides so as to come up with a good, sound way for approving those types of exemptions.
Okay, so would you like to withdraw your amendment and we'll just adjourn the matter? Postpone it? Okay, but before we go there, no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I would like to get that information because my feeling right now is just I want to make sure that we're on the same playing field. So my feeling now is to proceed with option one, but if we can get some more information, if we do postpone this, to get a more informed understanding of how option two would work, I'd be agreeable to that. So I will withdraw the amendment, Your Worship, and we'll go from here.
Right, you can accomplish the full exemption through a grant program. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you. I'm just going to talk about the occupancy, and I think you're suggesting, and I'm just putting words in your mouth here, about a sliding scale in regards to can we, does it all have to be flat rate for, singles are all 1, multiples are 2, that there could be variances in each one of those divisions. So I'm just wondering, when would we look at that, or is that still something that can come down the pipes?
So I believe that Ms. Law is going to be taking a look at that and providing us with some advice on that. She may need some further information from staff as to what it is that council's vision for growth here and housing mix entails. But I would expect that if this is adjourned to the January 15th meeting as an example, we should get some additional information from staff and from Hemson on these issues.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Anyone else? Councillor Lewis, any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I will jump in here on this one. And thank you, Councillor Dubanow, for bringing up the question that you and I spoke at a little bit of length earlier today on. I'm happy that we're moving in that direction. I think we would be doing a disservice by not continuing to look at the industrial component to this, and I think waiting for staff to get back to us with some advice and options is most prudent. So I do support the if we are moving this to the January 15th meeting, and appreciate staff for hearing our concerns with those.
Anyone else? If not, Councillor Dubanow, I just want to tell you as well that I'm reviewing the list of projects as well, because I don't want to get caught in the same predicament that we did with Helena Street. Just want to make sure that we're on solid ground there. So I think staff may look at that as well. Did you want to move to defer this then to January the 15th, 2024?
Yes, I would, Your Worship, and I actually completely agree with you on the list of projects. I'm very keen on that as well. But yes, I would like to move that we postpone this till the January 15th meeting.
Okay, any questions as to timing? If not, all in favor of the deferral? And that is unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you again in January, I guess. Okay, that takes us to the consent agenda. And Councillor Lewis, I believe you had an item that you wished to be removed from the consent agenda.
Thank you, and that would be item 8.5 LLS 03-2023.
Okay, so then I'm going to have, are there any other reports anyone wishes removed from the consent agenda? Okay, so then can I have a motion to move the consent agenda less LLS 03-2023? Councillor Christensen. Okay, any questions with respect to any of the remaining reports? That also includes the rather lengthy PDS 81-2023 comprehensive zoning bylaw amendments. Councillor Noyes.
Just a comment, and I'm sure I'm not related to anybody on there. In regard to IS 25-2023, the Frenchman's Creek Municipal Drain, again, we have a lot of Ontario Limited. I don't think I'm related to anybody. But again, just a question, if whenever possible, if we could actually have who actually owns this to know if we actually are in a conflict or not.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you say that again?
Okay, that if staff could, whenever possible, tell us who actually is the owner of the Ontario numbered company, so we know if we have a conflict or not. Yeah, the Frenchman's Creek.
And the significance of that? Tell me again.
Would be so that we would know if we were in a conflict of interest. So let's say if my husband happened to be one of the benefiting property owners, then he has this company that I don't know about. I'm just being facetious here. But we don't know who the Ontario company is, and so we don't know if we're in a conflict or we could possibly be in a conflict position or not.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think your husband would do that. It'd be at his peril. Okay, anything further, Councillor Noyes? Anyone else? So I had spoken to Ms. Dilwaria earlier today, and I asked her a few questions. I made a suggestion with respect to PDS 81-2023 that the definition of wall, which is going to be changed by removing some wording, actually keep that in, but specify that those pillars and whatever the other one was be explicitly excluded. In other words, you can't constitute them as a wall, which is what we ran into on Stone Mill, I think, or Windmill, Stone Mill. Is that something that can be done?
Your Worship, I would like to defer that question to Mr. Imarino.
Sure. Good evening. So my question, and to be precise,
change the definition of wall, but rather than removing pillars listed as a specific or explicit exemption, correct?
So this is found in section 5.361, and it's in the appendix, I think. Appendix 2, which is part of the definitions. Let me see if I can get to it. So what I'm suggesting that the wording should be so that it's very clear that they're not included. A lot of definitions in this. So I'm suggesting that where you've removed and shall include pillars and columns, should simply state and shall not include pillars and columns so that it's patently clear. Is that something that can be done?
Yes, staff can do that, no problem, yeah.
Okay, since you're up there, I had some concerns about the setbacks regarding the window sills, the window wells, and also the outdoor patios that could encroach. The outdoor patios up to 1/4 of a meter, which is 10 inches from the side yard setback. And the window wells, I think a 1/2 meter, and I think the qualification was that they couldn't interfere with swales on the side of the property. How will that be monitored?
Your worship, that would be at building permit stage for new builds or through complaints.
So someone comes in, they decide to put a patio up, and they run it right over to the property line. I mean, we've had people putting up sheds in the swales at the rear of properties. How would we control that?
Yeah, so your worship, this issue mostly comes up for new builds where we have a new subdivision with lots of new lots, and then those lots have individual grading plans, they get approved. Then at the building permit stage, when the house is built, there's some sort of interference. So it would be monitored through reviewing those new building plans as well as the grading plans for the individual dwellings.
Do you have to get a permit to put up a low patio, like a wooden patio that's less than a foot? I think it's less than 1.5 feet high.
That would be a building code question. I think under a certain height, it would not be required.
Right. Okay. So I see a challenge in the future. I believe the rest of my questions were answered with the exception of on page 184 of Appendix 2, there was some reference to something in Lake Erie. Setbacks, I think. Let me see if I can find it. Regulations for detached accessory dwelling units along Lake Erie. Notwithstanding the provisions of Section 6.1 or Section 6.43F, a detached accessory dwelling unit may be permitted in the front, this is what it was, in the front yard in the waterfront residential zone with a minimum front yard setback of 7.5 meters. So that presumably is directed at the waterfront residential zone, and that would be primarily the west side of Crystal Beach or along Lake Erie in the rural areas?
Yeah, and so that provision aligns with the existing permissions for accessory buildings, just understanding that people often want to build on the, I guess, they build their house fronting the lake, and then they use what's considered in the zoning bylaws their front yard as the rear yard.
Right, so then you would have a house fronting on Lake Erie on a long lot, and they want to put up a second house, which they're entitled to do now because of Bill 23.
Correct.
And they can do that within 7.5 meters of Erie Road or Thunder Bay Road. Is that what this would
correct.
provide?
Yeah, yes.
So the setback seems to be awfully small. I mean, these are large, deep lots.
So that's consistent with the existing setback for a dwelling. So if somebody chose to build their dwelling in that location, they could do that now.
On those roads.
Correct.
On the
And same
north
with, yes, and same with any other accessory building.
You didn't hear, on the north side, it's 7.5, but even on the south side, if they wanted to build, it would be 7.5 meters?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So this amendment is just in keeping with something that's consistent?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other members of council have any questions? If not, then I'll call the question with I'm sorry, Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, yes, Mayor Redekop, just more clarification on your wall question.
Mr. Yamarino.
Basically, I'm looking at, you don't want it to include pillars and columns, is that?
I want to make sure that it's clear that they are excluded as a wall. We had a development on Stone Mill Road where they connected two buildings by calling pillars a wall. And according to our existing zoning bylaw, that counted, so they were able to enclose that.
Okay, thank you. And okay, and I'm on page 5.44 because I was also kind of caught that when I was reviewing it, and I think that's already been taken out. It's redlined and it's crossed out, so I'm assuming that they have done that.
Right, and I'm suggesting that rather than just stroke it out, make it clear that it does not
It's not,
include
okay.
them.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, all those in favor of the items in the consent agenda? Opposed? That is carried. So now we'll go to LLS 03-2023. Councillor Lewis, are you prepared to move that?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, and you had some questions on that report.
Correct, Mayor Redekop. I appreciate the work that's been done by staff to update the terms of reference, and I know this is something that has been long awaited by the current EAC committee members who have been in place since the last election. I also appreciate staff looking for efficiencies, processes for consistency amongst committees. But the the terms of reference indicates going from 9 committee members down to 7. And the only, kind objection I have to the current terms of reference is lowering that threshold for the committee members. I know since I've been on the committee, there has been no issue with quorum. I did speak to the current chair, who's been the past chair for a number of years, and there has been no issue with quorum. And I do think we have a very diverse group of knowledgeable volunteers that do a considerable amount of work that I know we all appreciate on planning applications when it comes from an environmental perspective. And certainly advice that we don't necessarily have around the council tables or necessarily at the staff level. But I would like to modify the terms of reference to stay consistent with the current number, which would be 9. And I also just wanted to mention that I know there's been some changes at the staff level to the terms of reference since EAC committee provided comments in the terms of reference. I don't believe those changes to be contrary to the beliefs of the committee members, but I do hope that they do or have seen a copy of those changes since it has been made. And I know a lot of them do not follow the regular council meetings, but the big issue for me is lowering that threshold of the committee members from 9 to 6 when at the current time I don't see it being a problem. And I would ask that council entertain that small change. And certainly if staff have any comments they'd like to make, I'd be happy to listen to those as well.
Well, why don't you put an amendment on the floor to have a committee composed of 9 members, 8 citizens, plus 1 member of council, and then we'll get comment from staff. So that's a motion that you're moving to amend. That would be paragraph 2.2 of the terms of reference. And Ms. Dilwaria, any comments on that, or Mr. Todd, either of you?
Yes, Your Worship. The reason that 9 members, the threshold for 9 members was placed, this was done before we had the environmental planner on board. And that was a time staff wanted more direction from EAG because we wanted to get the expertise from different people from different environmental fields. But now, in staff opinion, we have a person who has the credentials in environmental planning and would be able to contribute significantly to those decisions. That was the reason we felt 9 would be in our interest to reduce the number from 9 to 7. But however, if council feels that 9 is more appropriate, staff does not have any objection to that.
Okay, because we do have 9 people that are very anxious to be engaged, and we do have natural heritage and climate change issues that are imminent as part of our strategic plan. Mr. Clerk, any comments yourself?
Thank you, through your worship. Just to add, in the report, it also mentioned that the reduction in the size of the committee would help with site visits. So these committee members are often required to attend on-site, so it's a little bit overwhelming with a larger group. So just reducing the size might help alleviate that.
Sounds like they're quite happy with the arrangements as they are. Any other members of council wish to speak to the amendment? If not, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? None opposed, that is carried. And Councillor Lewis, you were somewhat looking for some clarification on the mandate that's outlined in the terms of reference and how that would work. And Ms. Dilwari, we had a chance to chat about that earlier today. Can you comment on what the scope of work would be and how that fits in with the mandate or the objectives set out in the terms of reference?
Yes, Your Worship. So staff is very thankful to have the EAC on as an advisory committee. We go to them when we have questions related to natural heritage. So, but at the same time, there have been situations in past when there is a property which has an EC overlay zone and the applicant has come in for a building permit application. Those are simple things which staff can look into. Now we have an environmental planner. So in staff's opinion, the minor issues like building permit, minor zoning amendment application can be dealt at the staff level. EAC has the expertise. They are people who have expertise in different fields of environment. So we would like to engage them on policy matters, which would include official plan amendments, secondary plan issues, any other policy matter like secondary plans. That would be where we would like to engage EAC. But regarding the small and the minor matters, I think it would be more appropriate, and in order to achieve efficiency, especially with Bill 109, we have certain timelines that we have to meet. It would be in staff's best interest to have those issues dealt at a staff level instead of taking it to EAC. But however, if there is an application that we think would require input from EAC, we would definitely take it back, and that in staff, like that would my recommendation, leave that discretion with staff. If something important is coming up, we would definitely take it back. But as far as the terms of reference is concerned, let's limit that to the bigger or the major projects.
And I suppose if there are any issues that arise that EAC is concerned about, the paragraph 8.1 indicates that they can solicit an amendment to the terms of reference through their minutes to council. Councillor Lewis, anything further on this?
No, and thank you, Ms. Dawaria, for the clarification on that. And Your Worship, as we know, EAC, if we're not involving them, they will absolutely let us know. So no further questions, and thank you.
Okay, anyone else? If not, then I'll call the question on the amended motion with respect to the terms of reference for EAC. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. So that takes us then, I guess, to Planning and Development Services. Councillor Dubanow.
Yes, Your Worship. Planning and Development Services is in session for the evening. We have no presentations or delegations. However, we do have a report on the agenda this evening. It's PDS 80-2023, and that is the secondary plan prioritization. That council approves the order of priority respecting the secondary plan. Can I get a mover for that? Councillor McDermott. Are there any questions or comments from members of council? Your Worship.
Thank you, Chair. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this since I read the report, and I'm just trying to put this all into a context. So we have a strategic plan, we have an asset management plan, we have some master plans with respect to services, we have development charges, bylaw and study that are in the process of being approved. The asset management plan is being reviewed and updated. And we have a budget. And we have the region's official plan. We have our official plan, which is now being reviewed. And we've got this now list of secondary plans and a priority being proposed. To some extent, I'm thinking we're losing some control. A few months ago, Pelham West Lincoln adopted its new official plan, which aligned with the region's official plan. And in their official plan, they actually identified areas where they would prefer development take place. So it was going to be staged. I think it was 4 or 5 areas that they had identified. It's been appealed because some of the people in the 4th or 5th area wanted to be moved up. When this whole regional official plan exercise was undertaken, it preempted a municipal comprehensive review that the region was undertaking. And one of the very first meetings that I was involved in after the 2014 election was a meeting with our staff, the planner at the region, Reno Mustachi, Ron Tripp, whatever his position was at the time, and it was to talk about our industrial land need. So our industrial land strategy, which was started, I think, around 2012. And we were very concerned about getting industrial land into the urban boundary so that we could attract more businesses. And that was our focus. And when the region undertook its official plan, they had our studies. They had our follow-up studies. They had all kinds of information about where we wanted the urban boundaries to be expanded. They asked us for advice as to where we wanted the residential boundaries expanded. We told them we don't need to expand our urban boundaries for residential purposes. We have lots of land within our urban boundaries, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. So we went through that exercise and identified some parcels. One of those parcels is the one described as West Gorham Community Expansion Area, and that's fine. And originally it wasn't put in, now it's into the urban boundary. And we've got another one over here behind Take Two Restaurant and over behind Spears High Point, which is residential. The Spears High Point one would come under the Sunset Drive Community Expansion Area. I have a bit of an issue with respect to us having lots of land within the urban boundary where the services already exist, where we've already paid for them, and where now we're looking at how we make sure that they will meet growth and new opportunities for construction. So we have some areas along Garrison Road out towards Concession, Central Avenue, down around the old Fort area into the south end, or what old-timers call the south end of Fort Erie, the west end, where we have some restrictions with respect to sanitary sewer. We've had some proposals now, very modest proposals, that we've had to put holds on because we're not sure that we've got adequate infrastructure to meet those needs. So we know we're going to have to put money into that. And some of that will be growth related. We have projects along Garrison Road near the elementary school, across the street. A couple. We've had some meetings with others, so we know that there's going to be some development in there. And that's within the urban boundary. Some of these plans have been in the works for a while. I'm just advised earlier today that Crescent Farms, the developer wants to change that development. So we don't have a plan for that area. We need a plan for that area. And I don't think we need a plan for an area that was outside the urban boundary until a year ago, and for residential purposes. Gorham Community Expansion Area, okay. That's one owner. They've done a lot of work on this. Presumably it's going to be a mixed housing type of development. I have problems with it in the sense that we don't have the infrastructure at that end of the town in terms of roads and in terms of schools for two things. And now we're going to have more pressures put on. I presume that we have the water and sewer capacity with respect to that. Not sure about that, but I guess in some respects the secondary plan would identify that. In terms of the Sunset Drive employment expansion area, I know that there are a few property owners who who wish to move forward, similar to what was done in Bridgeburg North. They get together, they meet with staff. I don't know why we would need to have a secondary plan for that. The secondary plan, in my view, is to try to integrate new development with the neighborhood, and hence the neighbors should be involved in some respect. This report calls for a technical committee as opposed to a focus group. I don't really agree with, I agree with the technical committee. I think that's very important. I don't agree with not including residents in the development of a secondary plan. Staff thinks that maybe if there's going to be a community focus group, it should be scaled down. Okay, that may be fine. But if we don't get the buy-in of residents at the secondary planning stage, we're not going to get them to buy into the types of development that are taking place. And if they don't buy into the developments, then we have problems as a council. Developers have problems as developers. And it just doesn't fit, I think, what our vision is for how this community should grow. That people should have at least an opportunity to express what their views are. I think the exercises that have been done to date have been excellent. Maybe they've taken a bit of time. Maybe we have to go to the approach that's been suggested by staff, whereby we allow the developer to carry the ball, pay for the studies under the guidance of the municipality, make sure that they've got control on that, peer review where necessary. I guess that all makes sense, but I don't think we can, in particular the West Gorham Community Expansion Area, I don't think we should be excluding the public at that stage. So I've got, for all of that, what I'm suggesting is this, that we modify the priority provisions so that Bridgeburg North remains first. They've been working on this and they're going forward. I get that. West Gorham Community Expansion Area, I know that they've been dealing with the town. Okay, that can be something that won't put a lot of pressure on staff. They can go forward. But I do believe that number 3 should be Crescent Park Craft Neighborhood. I believe number 4 should be Walden Garrison Neighborhood. I believe that the Sunset Drive Community Expansion should be at the bottom of that list. The Sunset Drive Employment Expansion Area, I don't think needs to be on the list at all. I think staff can move forward with that, and then it's a completely different process.
Your Worship, are you moving an amendment? I just wanted to go to staff.
I'm waiting to hear what staff, I'm suggesting what's in my head.
No, and that's fair. I think Ms. Deloria might have a comment with regard to the land added to our urban boundary and whether secondary plans are necessary even to proceed. Ms. Deloria, can you perhaps expand on that, particularly with the employment land side of things?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So regarding the need for a secondary plan for the urban expansion land, we are required to have that secondary plan because based on the regional official plan, any land which is greater than 15 hectares is subject to go through a secondary plan. So as part of that policy, we would have to adhere to the regional official plan, so we would be required to undertake a secondary plan project.
Yeah, I don't take issue with the secondary plans. I think they're very important tools in order as we grow. I take issue with the fact that we've got lands within the existing urban boundary where we know that there's going to be development, where there's already been proposals put forward. We've been allowing this to go on now for a while. We've approved, Harbour Town is a perfect example, which was approved without any type of secondary plan. And there have been others. I think we need to pay attention to that. I think that we lose control of where development takes place if we start providing priorities to the newly introduced properties into our urban boundary. To me, it doesn't make sense. And so that's why I suggested that we alter this.
Yeah, Ms. Deloria, is there something you wanted to add to that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a couple of things. In past, the council has always established the priority, how the secondary plan should be moving forward, but that time it was all done in-house. Now, since then, town council has established a way that we can go to. It could be a developer initiated. We have different ways to achieve the same goal. So it's not essential that the secondary plan has to follow a priority list. It can be done concurrently, and we would be able to achieve to the same goals. Like some, Bridgeburg can be started, and 171 Gordon can be started at the same time, but depending upon the complexity of it, one can finish earlier than the other. So it would be all I could say, yes, there is a priority list, but it is not essential that we would follow the same process. It can be done based on the community need, the developer initiative, and staff resourcing.
And if I may, just a quick follow-up. So with regard to the employment land, because I think that's critical here, is the need to find a way to make that land usable. The neighborhood land to the south is less of a priority, as the mayor stated, and I completely agree. We have plenty of available land for residential growth within our urban boundary. Is there a way that we perhaps could do something concurrent with the employment land as well as the residential, perhaps treat them separately? Because I get where the mayor is coming from, and I agree. My only concern is the employment land, because that's going to be critical to the future of our community and finding a way to get some kind of secondary plan going so we can get some shovels in the ground. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Waria?
Mr. Chair, I agree with you completely. We have sufficient land within the urban area from community perspective, but because the lands which have been added, both from the industrial and the community perspective, both have the similar needs as far as the servicing is concerned. So if we have to deal that whole area comprehensively, I think it would be, and Mr. Walsh can add to it, I think if you are doing a servicing study, if you are doing comprehensive study, it would be better that if both plans can go hand in hand. That's just my opinion, but...
So,
Your Worship, did you want to add some thoughts to that?
yeah, so, what an industrial park looks like, I don't know that the residents have a particular concern or view on that. I do know that they have a concern about what the rest of the neighborhood looks like in terms of housing. So I don't think that both of these have to be done concurrently. Yes, there will be need for servicing, and that's fine. Servicing master plans can be done. I guess what causes me concern is we're giving a priority to new parcels of land put into our urban boundary that we don't really need. What we're doing, this is a trap, and the trap is we're engaging now in urban sprawl unintentionally, but unwittingly, if we go along with the priority list. And that is really contrary to everything else that we're doing, because if we service these lands outside the urban boundary, we're extending our service areas, we're taking on more assets. We can't even now cover the cost of maintaining our assets long-term until we start putting more money into our asset management plan in capital reserves. And so we're going to be committing ourselves to this. Once the secondary plans are done, let's not kid ourselves. They're going to want to develop. And so Gorham is a little bit different. They've got the services there. My problem with them isn't water and sewer. My concern is roads and schools. Over here on the other side, I took a look at the letter that was submitted. I don't think we need another 240 or 250 townhouses, because that's what the development is. And I'm not willing to participate as an enabler of that. So hence, I think we should take out 3. We definitely need to proceed with the employment lands that have been added to our urban boundary. I don't know that we've done a secondary plan, and I guess maybe I'd like to know what's the purpose of the secondary plan other than identifying the services that are required.
Mr. Waria, do you want to just give a summary on what we would need for a secondary plan within the employment area?
So, yes, Mr. Chair, through the secondary plan, we would establish what kind of industries would go in, compatibility between if we are rezoning some lands as heavy industrial, where the location would be, and the prestige industrial. Then we would be establishing the road network. We would be establishing the servicing network. We would be creating the policies regarding the official plan, what kind of uses that would go in. That would be the intent of the secondary plan.
And then, if I may, just add a follow-up to that, is it possible to perhaps do this in maybe a hybrid manner? Because I understand the mayor's concerns about the residential side of things. We do a secondary plan, we're going to have people jumping right in, ready to go, even though we have other land available. Is it possible to do a way to look at this where, yes, we have to service it concurrently, it's all tied in together, but perhaps the neighborhood visioning or other factors, we could proceed with the industrial portion and then maybe cut off the visioning of the streetscape and the neighborhood type and the housing types that would go in the residential lane. I'm just trying to perhaps put some ideas out here because I think, with our discussion earlier, we're all eager to see the ability to bring employment land in, and just knowing that policy with the secondary plan is required. I wouldn't want to, I'm trying to find that balance here between addressing the need for the employment land, but then also recognizing that the residential land, it was added on, but really it's an entirely different ballgame. So I'm trying to find a way here, hopefully, to address the mayor's concerns and also make this work for staff, because that employment land is going to be very critical moving forward. It's the residential land, that bringing that before some of the other ones is a difficult pill to swallow. So do you have some thoughts on that?
Mr. Chair, we can definitely do that. We can, as far as the servicing and the road network would be concerned, we can look at it comprehensively. But as far as the details policies would be concerned, we can focus on employment lands and push the community lands at the back burner.
Your Worship?
Well, that's good. So then, can I move an amendment?
Go right ahead.
So I would propose that we amend the priority list so that Bridgewick North is number 1, West Gorham number 2, number 3 is the Sunset Drive Employment Expansion Area, number 4, Crescent Park and Craft neighborhoods, number 5, Walden Garrison neighborhood, number 6, Lakeshore.
So the amendment is to remove the Sunset Drive community expansion and just leave the employment expansion on the list, Your Worship?
That's correct, and move Crescent Park from 5 to 4.
Okay. Did you get that, Mr. Clerk? Okay. Any questions or comments with regard to the amendment? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Just some clarification, and I don't necessarily disagree with everything the mayor has said. I am concerned about urban sprawl, but what I also heard was that this list isn't necessarily prioritized, even though it says on the top it is. But in the discussion, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the list that they're going to go, but yet it's a staff recommendation, but it doesn't necessarily have to follow this. And further in the report, it talks about to expedite some of these secondary plans, we're going to let the developers pay for, do the studies, et cetera, et cetera. I have no doubt that Mika will be, and our staff will be right on top of the studies and the plans that come back. But it also kind of puts that those who have the money to do it can jump to the top of the queue. So even though we kind of don't want 3A in there, because I don't think it's in the urban boundaries, et cetera, but I would imagine whoever owns it is wanting to get it done and may have more assets, more money to put towards completing all the studies for the secondary plan. So how do we get around that with the mayor's amendment? Like, is this, like, are we like nailing this down that this is the way we're going to go? Or is it still, there's a time frame that we can move these things around depending on who's paying and what the interest is, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good question because we've had some discussion about the privately initiated secondary plans. Ms. Deloria, it's my understanding that there will be almost like a criteria that needs to be met in order for a developer-initiated secondary plan to be accepted as a proposal for the town. Is that something that would help address the concerns Councillor Noyes just raised about having an opportunity to jump the queue, so to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there would be a criteria that the staff would have to look into, which we would see that, yes, if everything has been fulfilled, then we would initiate the secondary plan. And those are outlined in the report, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Noyes?
Well, and I appreciate that answer, but let's say Bridgeburg North, which we think should be priority 1, and the other one, the the employment lands. Those two are kind of like, they're not quite ready yet, and they're kind of putting off, they don't have the dollars to do it, or they're just not ready for whatever reason. When then number 5 and 6 jump on and say, well, we're ready, we're going to go ahead. I'm still not quite understanding how we're going to.
Well, Bridgeburg North would be a town-initiated secondary plan, not a developer-initiated secondary plan. So we would be following that list. Is that kind of how we would be doing things, Ms. Delwaria? We would be following the list, at least under guidance with the priorities we set up right now?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, what staff would always be in the driver's seat here, whether it's a developer initiated or whether it is it's town initiated, we would be the one who would, even if we would receive the cost studies from the developer, we would be assessing it, whether it complies with our regulations, the vision of council. So town staff and council would always be in the driver's seat.
Councillor Noyes?
Okay, I appreciate that, and considering one of the words, one of the phrases used, vision of council, is there any way this is going to come back to us so we can say, like if number 6 turns up tomorrow, and that's not really where we want to go yet, does council then have an opportunity of saying, hold off on the secondary plan, or do not proceed at this time?
I would imagine we would, but Ms. Delwaria, you just want to confirm that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So if, let's say, for an example, if number 6 wants to proceed ahead, we would take a report to council saying that this is for the following reason, number 6, it's getting pushed forward in comparison to Bridgeburg, and we would definitely notify or keep council updated on every secondary plan that we would be initiating or the developer would be initiating. We would keep council in loop. Yes, absolutely.
And just to expand on that, we could say, no, we do want to proceed with our priority list. We would ultimately be, or staff and council would ultimately have the final say on this, not the developer. Is that correct?
Yes, council would have the final say, but we would have to give reasons why we would not allow the developer or number 6 to initiate first. Even if they have met all the requirements that we have outlined, and we would have to have sound reasons why we are saying no to them.
Fair enough. Councillor Noyes, I saw the mayor raise his hand. Is there something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I'm glad to hear that, but let's say there's a number 7, 8, 9 that we haven't even talked about, and they come to the town and say, hey, we're ready, and here's our thing, and we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, and so we want to proceed with the secondary plan. So this list doesn't necessarily have to be exhaustive. We could have another developer add to it, right? If he comes to us with all
Councillor Noyes, I think you might be getting a little ahead there because we know the areas of the municipality that need secondary plans based on our available existing urban boundary and the urban boundary expansion. So I don't think we would ever have a 7, 8, or 9. I think this is the exhaustive list of the areas that do need secondary plans in our community right now. If we do have another comprehensive review by the region, say 20 years from now, that may change, but I don't think this is going to be changing anytime soon.
I hope you're right, but I have my doubts.
Fair enough. Your worship?
Yeah, so there are some other areas that were put into the urban boundary that are residential, and I don't know whether they're of a magnitude that they would require a secondary plan, but there is that possibility. I also don't want us to lose sight of the fact that even if a developer has undertaken the cost of pursuing a secondary plan, there's still staff time that is involved in that. And so, again, number 2 as an example, up until last November, that was not a property that our staff had to spend any time on in terms of a secondary plan because it was outside the area. And in fact, we just spent, and it's still under appeal, a significant amount of time doing the Crystal Beach secondary plan, which this would have been part of. So it may be that can be integrated into that. I don't know how easy that will be. But, in terms of jumping the queue or not having, a firm list of priorities, I would expect if we pass this is a list of priorities. And that we're not going to have other stuff popping up because they've said, well, we've got the money and blah, blah, blah. That then throws out our view that there should be some organized development in this town right out the window.
I think that's very fair, Your Worship. I'm just going to go. Do any other members of council have any questions regarding the mayor's amendment? Was there anything else, Councillor Noyes, your worship? Okay. I'll call the question on the amendment, though. Is all those in favor? Councillor Lewis, was that a yay or a nay? I see yay. Thank you very much. So the amendment carries. So now the report as amended. Are there any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Noyes.
Just a comment again, and I think the mayor brought that up about that I think we still want a community focus group. And so I would kind of change that and say it wouldn't be instead, or it could be in addition to, instead of instead of.
Do we need an amendment for that?
Mr. Oria, do we need an amendment for that, or is that something that could be handled when a secondary plan project is brought to council as part of a report? I'm just wondering the best way to do it, because the mayor had mentioned earlier it might be different for industrial versus residential areas. I'm just wondering what would be best for how to handle this, what your thoughts were.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend, because our recommendation was very clear, says, instead of community focus group, I think it would be in our best interest to say, in addition to technical advisory, we should have community focus group.
Nope, that's fair. Councillor Noyes, did you want to move that amendment?
Yes, I'll move that amendment.
So the amendment then is that it's also in addition, a community focus group. To
replace the instead of.
In addition to the technical, we will also have the community focus group. Any questions or comments from council regarding the amendment? So I'll call the question then. All those in favor? So that carries. So we're back to and I note Councillor Lewis's hand up. Are there any other, now that we're back to the report as amended, any other questions or comments? So I'll call the question, on the report as amended. All those in favor? So that carries. Thank you very much. And again, I note Councillor Lewis's hand was up. So we have no other reports on the agenda this evening. However, we do have a memo regarding Birdie Bay drain maintenance on the agenda under new business. I'm just wondering, that's under PDS. Ms. Deloria, do you just want to give council a brief summary of the memo?
Mr. Chair, I think that's in the wrong business subdivision.
Yeah, I was a little...
We can either defer it till IS or I can speak to it now.
We'll do it now. Yep. Yeah. I was a little surprised too. I thought it should be IS.
So at the November 6th meeting, the Birdie Bay drain maintenance contract award was brought to council. Councillor Noyes in particular had a number of questions, primarily dealing with the 2007 engineers reports. The questions are hopefully covered off in there. I know Councillor Noyes had a couple of follow-ups with Mr. Davidson this afternoon. If council has any questions about the memo, I'd be happy to answer them. Anything specific?
Councillor Noyes, do you have any questions right now?
No, but I do want to mention that I did have a talk with Troy, and he basically explained any of my questions and just clarified some of the points. So I'm pleased with the information provided.
Very good.
Thank you. Any other members of council questions? All right, so moving on. Just remind me, do we need to actually move this, or? Okay, I didn't think so. So we have no other memos. Are there any other new business or inquiries under planning and development services that anyone wishes to raise this evening? All right, seeing none. Questions or comments regarding the business status report? Seeing none, I hand the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dubanow. That takes us to infrastructure services, Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Infrastructure Services is now in session. There are no presentations and delegations. There are no reports. Any new business inquiries? Seeing none, that brings us to the business status report. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll hand the chair back to you.
Well done. Councillor McDermott, you now have a target under Corporate and Community Services.
Thank you, Worship. Corporate and Community Services is now in session. We have no presentations or delegations. We have no reports. Are there any new business inquiries? Seeing none, anything on the business status report? Seeing nothing, back to you, Your Worship.
That was excellent, Councillor McDermott. My compliments. So we have a matter in closed session. This relates to property on Pettit Road. Can I have a mover that we go into closed session? Councillor Dubanow. Are there any questions or comments about whether we should go into closed session? All those in favor? That, Councillor McDermott, are you in favor of going into closed session or indifferent? Okay, that's a yes. And Councillor Lewis, somehow I guess we'll get you in there as well. Okay, so we're off to closed session. Okay, we're back in the chambers after the closed session meeting, and Councillor Lewis, you have the resolution for us to rise and reconvene from closed session.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself that council rises and reconvenes from closed session at 9:18 p.m. with report that council directs staff and legal counsel to proceed as directed in closed session.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to scheduling of meetings. Councillor Dubanow and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, Your Worship, the Museum and Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee will be having a meeting tomorrow at Town Hall at 1 p.m. It appears here we're in Conference Room 1, and that typically consists of the Heritage Committee as well as some museum information. So again, tomorrow at 1 p.m. here, Town Hall, Conference Room 1.
Thank you. Councillor Noyes.
On the 13th of December at 10 o'clock, the 40 non-for-profit housing is going to meet at Green Acres, and it's going to be our regular meeting and our AGM.
Any others? Councillor Christensen.
Yes, Your Worship. The Ridgeway BIA is holding its annual general meeting at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, December 13th. So this Wednesday at the Beachcombers in Ridgeway.
And any others?
Your worship.
Councillor Lewis, yes.
Thank you. The Crystal Beach Business Improvement Association will also be having their annual general meeting on Wednesday, December the 13th at the Crystal Ridge Library at 6 p.m.
I'm just checking to see what I've got. Okay, I don't have any. Any other meetings? If not, then Councillor Dubanow.
Yes, Your Worship, I'd like to move that council and committee adjourn at 9:20 p.m. this evening.
All those in favor? That again is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone.